So I first met Amit Garg, our guest for today. Thank you for coming in SRC at Stanford. So during a summer research program, he was doing some work on biotechnology, biocomputation. I was in a double E lab, and we had lots of lunches and dinners together. And I was just inspired by his energy, enthusiasm, optimism. And then we've been friends for years since, and so proud of him when he got into the Harvard MBA. And I remember visiting him, and he showed me around campus. So grateful for you being here, Amit. And Amit's a very successful entrepreneur, investor, philanthropist. He's the founder of Tau Ventures. They specialize in artificial intelligence and describe that in more detail. So I guess I'll start out the first question. I'd like to explore something that I don't know too much about. I know you have a fascinating background coming from Brazil, and yet you have an Indian heritage. And I was just wondering if you could tell us your childhood growing up in Brazil and what inspired you to come all the way to the US.
Well, first of all, Greg, could say the same about you in terms of energy. It's been 20 years that you're stuck with me. So it's an absolute pleasure to be here on the podcast. And Daniel, thank you very much for having me too. I did grow up in Brazil, specifically in a city called Vitória, which I guess in English you would pronounce Victoria. The way I ended up there is, a little bit roundabout. My parents are from India, from northern India specifically, and they're professors. They went to Brazil about 50 years ago. My dad first, and then a little bit later, my mom. And they went to the capital of Brazil, and a bunch of things happened. I am happy to share the story in more details if people will like, but they ended up in this smaller place, which is where I was born and raised. I stayed there till the age of 13, and then my parents moved to the capital of Brazil, back for them, and first time, I guess, for me. And I did my high school there. From high school, that was my platform to be able to come here to the States. So I came for undergrad to Stanford. And then, Greg, that's how you and I got to know each other. So that's the short version of the story. The longer version of the story is my parents always, even though we were in a smaller place, they always inculcated the idea that there's a bigger world out there, that you should think more broadly. It's not just what you have here. So they taught me English at home. This is an acquired language. They taught me Hindi, which is the main language in northern India. So I speak, read, write fluently, natively in Portuguese, which is the main language in Brazil, and Hindi and English. And I do owe that a fair bit to my parents. My parents being professors, good professors, they also encourage the love of learning, I guess. They taught me enough that I could then pick up things on myself and continue furthering my interests, my passions. And I guess as a child, that was perhaps the little bit unusual thing, is that I love to read, I love to write, I love to study. And whenever people I know it's highly unusual to say I love to study. I realize that, but I did. When people would ask me what my favorite subject was, I would say, well, all of them. I just love to constantly be exploring, learning, and not to the detriment of other things that children do, right? Like playing on the streets. And yes, I played soccer terribly, but still I enjoyed it. Biking on the streets and having a very normal childhood. I guess the values here that my parents, and not just parents, but also my teachers, my mentors, my friends, the whole community around me, like the global village that created me, what they really honed in me was the desire to do more, the desire to always learn, the desire to always explore. It's kind of like, I guess Steve Jobs said, always be curious, always be foolish. So I hope I have that still. I hope I will always have.
What subject areas did your parents teach in?
My parents are professors of physics, both of them. My father finished his PhD in 1972. At that point in time, India was going through lots of ups and downs. He sought some opportunities outside, and he thought it was going out of India for a few months, but that ended up being 9 months, which became 18 months, which now has become 50 years. And my mom is also physics. She finished her PhD in 1974, I think, and she was working in India at the time at a different university. They got married. That's how my mom ended up in Brazil. And if you ever interview my mom for the podcast, she'll say she had no idea what she was getting into. She never thought she would end up spending 50 years in Brazil, but that's by serendipity, I guess, the life that they ended up leading. They have at this point helped create generations of people or helped educate and enlighten generations of folks in Brazil. My parents have now students who have themselves become professors, who themselves have had students who have now gone on to academia or to industry. And I think my father even has a few folks that had ended up in very high posts in the government. And they taught specifically at two different universities. They're affiliated with a couple of others, but they taught at the university in the capital of Brazil, and they taught at the university where I was born and raised.
I know you're close with your parents, and it must be challenging for you to be here in the U.S. with them being far away. How do you keep your connection?
Well, I think, Greg, that's probably a challenge common to all three of us on this call, where our parents are aging, or the relatives that we have, or the people that help raise us, they're getting older, and you do worry about their health. But I'll be very honest with you. For me, when I was 18, those are not things that were crossing my mind, right? When I was 18, I was more thinking of, wow, this is so exciting. I'm going to college in a different country, going to meet so many people. Now, obviously, that I'm older, and this has been a progression over the years, I do understand the sacrifices that my parents made to allow me to be here. The sacrifices in terms of money, obviously, it's expensive, but the sacrifices in terms of just being willing and able to let me go and let me go very far. For folks who are not aware, Brazil is really far. It takes a really long time to get there. It may be in the same Western Hemisphere, but there's no direct flight from the Bay Area. There's never been one. So it typically takes me good years, about 24 hours to get to them. On bad years, it takes me 36 hours. So during COVID, it has taken me 36 hours of flying to be able to get to where they are. So obviously the physical distance is not helpful. But I think there's something to be said about what all three of us here on this call do, which is helping develop technology and helping apply technology to improving our lives. I mean, cell phones didn't exist or they did exist, but I was not aware of them when I was 18. But now they're a phone call away. They are a WhatsApp away. They are a Zoom away. If I want to ship something, I can go on a website and do a few clicks and they will get it. So in that sense, the world has gotten smaller for sure. And I have the luxury of being able to do things like this. And I compare it to their generation, right? Like in the 1970s, for them to be able to communicate with their parents, it was literally a handwritten letter. They were lucky if they were able to do a phone call for more than 3 or 4 minutes now and then, because it was very expensive. So I think, to keep things in perspective, every generation has pushed the boundaries, right? Our grandparents' generation, it was unheard of to be able to even do conversations real time. Like you would have to send handwritten letters and wait for a month for a response, right? So we are now beneficiaries of all these developments that have happened, right? We're standing on the shoulders of all these technological innovations. And I keep reminding myself that what I have right now is something that generations of people before haven't had.
Absolutely. I like to travel through Europe once in a while and go on vagabonding trips. And I call my mom like every day and stay in touch. And
you're a good man. You're better than me.
Yeah.
I don't think I do that every day. You're a good man.
and then also like run my business with people mostly in South America, video chatting and keeping things going, even though I'm on the other side of the planet. So it feels magical. But I want to give you a chance to talk about some of your portfolio companies and investments you've had success with. And I know you're on your second fund, and so you had some success to get to that point. But ask that just so sort of open-ended, and encourage Daniel to help explore this.
Sure. If you guys want to go through the challenges, by the way, of getting up to here to the US and getting to this stage, which is Tau Ventures, I'm happy to talk about that too. Trust me, I skipped lots of ups and downs, lots and lots of them. But to answer your question, specifically, Greg. So Tau Ventures today, as we speak, is just about 85 million AUM. So this is total assets. It's technically 3 different vehicles. The very first vehicle we raised and closed in 2020. That was 17 million. These are public numbers, by the way. We did just about 25 investments out of it. Those investments have done, by and large, really well. I'll shamelessly disclose this here in this podcast. We, as we speak and record this, are sitting at just about 2.5x in the fund, in the first fund. And we have DPI, which is the fancy word for saying we return money back to our own investors. So we've had 3 major exits, and I'm happy to share those exits in details if you guys would like. But we, very high level, have returned about half of the money that investors have put in so far back to them within 2 years. So I'm really proud of that. Last year, we raised another vehicle, which is an opportunity fund. And I'm happy to explain what that is and how that's different from our first fund. That added just about another 26.3 million. We did an SPV, which added another 2.5 million into one of our deals. And this year we raised over Fund 2, and we're right now at just about 40 million in it. So total amount, if you do the math here, is just about 85. We are at this moment writing $500,000 checks. It can be a little higher, a little lower. We have syndicated our deals with, especially of our own LPs, and we usually bring them directly on our deals. So that has allowed us to increase our check sizes as needed. And I'm happy to share that in more detail if you guys would like to talk about it. But we are especially focused on AI, as both of you mentioned a little bit. We look at AI right now as being at an inflection point where there's so much stack of technologies that have been built that it's now about applying the AI to solve problems. You don't necessarily have to build the AI. Obviously, there's people doing that, but there's a whole host, a 10 to 100x more people now that can take what has been developed and apply it to solve problems. And that's what we're focusing on. I do the healthcare side, specifically digital health, companies like Dr. Chrono, which Daniel can speak very well of. That is something that would be in my focus. So if I had a time machine, I could go back 14 years, I would have seriously considered investing in Dr. Chrono at the seed stage. And my partner does the enterprise side. He does a lot of DevSecOps and cybersecurity and fintech and so on. I'm happy to describe the healthcare thesis in more detail if you guys would like. We can take this conversation in any direction that makes most sense.
I guess a question for you is, it seems like your history is in product. Just looking at your resume, you've been in product and then you got your MBA and then you made the jump to venture. Most people, there's a lot of people in the world that want to get into the venture capital world. You managed to break through. People look at Harvard. So I see this path for you where you went to Harvard. It's extremely hard to get into Harvard, like the MBA class. And then you made the jump to VC. Like that, how most people think that that's an impossible barrier. And you came from a crazy history, just talking through a little snippet of it. How does one get there? I guess that's a question for you. How did you make that jump to Harvard and then to venture capital where you're raising all of these funds? You are what Silicon Valley is and you live in Silicon Valley, correct? So you made it here. You live in the Valley or do you live outside?
I do. Yeah, I'm probably very close to you, Daniel. I'm in Menlo Park at home and I live half a mile away from campus. So 1 mile away from the Stanford campus. So I appreciate the shout out here. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've gotten. I did seize them. So it goes both ways, right? When opportunity knocks on your door, you also have to be able to seize them. I'm very grateful, honestly, to Stanford. It's the second best decision in my life, probably. I did my undergrad and master's there. I'm very technical. I did computer science. I did biology. I did the intersection of those two for my master's. So not a single one of these factors is the deciding factor for what I do today, but everything adds up. And to answer your question very, very specifically, the way I sort of broke into VC was after business school, which is becoming more and more common. So you join in as a junior partner. My specific title was senior associate because I worked for a large fund called Norwest Ventures, which is a fantastic. Anybody who's listening to this and considering working with them, I cannot recommend more. Norwest is a lot of founders turned investors, and it's been around for 61 years. It's by some measures the second oldest fund that's still around in the U.S. As we record this, is 13 billion under management. So I really apprenticed myself there. I learned so much about the trade, and I'm very close touch with many of the folks there still, and it helps inform what I do today. But the way I broke it is by replying to an ad that they posted in the business school. So once again, I will go back to the original thing I said: when opportunity knocks, you also have to be able to seize it. So I could have very well not responded to that. My life would have probably been very different. So somebody posted there, and that's perhaps luxury, I guess, of having gone to a really good business school where they thought about posting it there. But it also is upon me to then go and seek it. I do know the numbers, and I don't know 100% if those are accurate numbers, but at Norwest, at least, they had looked at hundreds of resumes and before they selected me. And I guess what they saw was a combination of somebody who's technical, somebody who is business savvy, somebody who had been an operator, somebody who also had an international background, which was a plus for them at the time, who had been in Silicon Valley for quite a while, who wanted to build a career at the intersection of startups and venture capital. I actually wanted to build my own company. So I ended up in venture capital somewhat accidentally, somewhat not accidentally, but that's just one way of doing it. I've actually written an article about this that I share with lots of folks who ask me, what are the common ways of getting into venture capital? There's many ways to the top of the mountain. If you want to look at this as the top of the mountain, there's many mountains, by the way. This is not the only mountain. But another way of doing it is be a very successful entrepreneur, and then you will be perhaps invited by the VCs that funded you. They'll say, hey, look, you've done a really good job. You made a lot of money. We can see you are savvy enough about how to get invested. Maybe you can also do now how to invest. So that's the second way. The third way is you raise your own VC fund, which is what I did now. There's many ways of raising a VC fund. I'm happy to share that in more detail. None of them is okay, maybe a couple of them are easy ways, but most of them are really hard ways. Either you are very successful and then you use your own capital, or you knock on 1,000 doors and raise money, or maybe you had the connections through family and friends. Maybe you were born in circumstances that allowed you to raise a venture capital fund. But that's the third way. And then the fourth way is the fourth most popular way, I would say, is you start a career in venture capital. That wasn't common even 20 years ago, 10 years ago, but nowadays I do see people fresh out of undergrad or even in undergrad. I've even met somebody who started a career in venture capital from high school. I have a bias. I think that having experience makes you a better investor, but doesn't mean that going straight into venture capital, you cannot be a good investor. And there's examples for and against all of these. So those are the four ways that I would highlight to be a venture capitalist. There are others.
I remember when you finished your MBA at Harvard, you got a job back in Silicon Valley, and I was excited to have you back. And we got a dinner and on University Avenue, and then we went for a little walk and walked past the Hewlett
I do
Packard
remember that
garage.
one.
Yeah, and
I do remember that one. Yep.
Yeah, I remember the way you responded to that, and it almost I got the sense it was almost like a sort of a spiritual experience for you to be kind of connected again back to like sort of the origin of these technologies.
It is honestly, it's easy to forget. And Greg, I know you feel the same way, and Daniel, I'm going to take a wild guess you feel the same way. It's easy to forget, perhaps being wherever you are, about everything that created that place, right? And I think we always have to be mindful, grateful for the people who have created before you that allow you to do the work that you do. So Silicon Valley is the product of hundreds, thousands of people, some of which are no longer with us. So going to a shrine, really like the HP garage, which I consider sort of the birthplace of Silicon Valley as in its modern form, it's a pretty incredible and rare thing, and especially more incredible to see that it's actually a very humble place. It's great things to have small beginnings. I guess another way of saying it, journeys of 1,000 miles to start with the first step. So there's been many, many folks who have taken those steps that allow me to now take another step.
And along those lines, Hewlett and Packard, they had a mentor, and it was Fred Terman, dean of engineering at Stanford. Have you personally had mentors that have helped sort of inspire you and sort of show you the path?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Could you talk about them a bit?
Sure. I wouldn't do justice to go through all of them. It would take me multiple podcasts to do that. But there have been mentors who have been teachers, actual teachers, whether in all the way from preschool up to college, including college and beyond, grad school. So one in particular that I remember was very well is my high school English teacher, Mr. Johnson, Craig Johnson. He's been an incredible influence into also kind of like my parents, thinking beyond and broaden my horizons. And he wrote my letter of recommendation that I guess is partly responsible for me having gotten into Stanford. So I'm extremely grateful for everything he taught me. In college, I did SLE, and Greg, I'll give you 3, 2, 1 seconds to have a reaction to that word.
Envy.
Envy. Oh, okay. I've got another reaction. So SLE, for those of you who are not aware, is a 1-year-long hardcore course in the humanities. And I'm what in Stanford parlance known as a fuzzy and a techie. Think of myself, and I believe I am actually fairly balanced in those two things. And yeah, I have the creds to show for it because I did a full year of a residential program, which was half of my course load into philosophy and literature. That's what structured liberal education was. I met lots of people, some people like me also, who were also very technical and focused on technical things, but others who weren't. I learned a lot about how to think and how to debate and how to embrace ideas and also challenge yourself through that course. So a bunch of professors, including one called Mark Menkal, who unfortunately is no longer with us. But Mark was an incredible influence into so many things. I have so many stories in him. He was also the sponsor for my nonprofit. That's a whole another story that I'm happy to go into if you guys would like. That work has evolved eventually into becoming a hospital in rural India. Owe it in some ways, Mark, for having believed in me and saying, yep, I will put the academic, stamp behind it for you to go do this. I talk to Vijay Pandey, who was a professor that I did my research under. Vijay posted a photo now recently on his link on his Facebook about half of his lab becoming VC and the other half becoming professors. So makes you wonder. That's the kind of people that he created. Vijay is an incredible leader when it comes to biotech and health science and life sciences. He's the main figure at Andreessen Horowitz for those kind of investments, and is somebody I still very much look up to. And I could go on and on and on here. And I'll throw in peers. Honestly, it's not just people who are necessarily older to you. It's also people who are the same age as you and people who are younger to you. I think you learn from everyone. I learned an incredible amount from my wife, and she did not pay me to say this. It's a lifelong learning from her. Preeti Sukerkar, for those who want to look it up and stalk her. But so many friends who have been parts of the journey. I would be remiss if I tried to cover this in one podcast.
What you've dealt with so many successful people to get to the point where you're at. Looking at, let's flip it and say, now that you're a venture capitalist, what makes a successful founder that kind of, you have a map and you see who's successful and who's not? You've had big exits. Like from those exits, is there any like indicators that let you say it looks like this person may have those qualities and what made them successful? Does that make sense? Like the question I'm asking, like what is it?
There isn't a single determining factor, honestly, for somebody to succeed who succeeded on their very first company. There are many who have succeeded.
Investors, like investors, is it different for investors than it is for entrepreneurs? Or would you say it's
I don't think that there's a single factor that can say, oh, this person checks that box and therefore they will be successful. Like it's not age, it's not gender, it's not ethnicity, it's not years of experience, it's not what school they went to, which is something that a lot of people say. All of those things can help. Look, I'm not going to deny here that if you went to really good schools, you will know a lot of other good people that you can hire, that you can raise money from, and you operate in circles where there's perhaps ideas that are shared that will help you. But it doesn't mean that if you didn't do that you're doomed to never succeed, right? Like, there's plenty of examples of people who have, plenty of examples of people who, despite having all those backgrounds, didn't succeed as much. I think if there's any one thing, it's mindset. A mindset is not a guarantee, but a mindset is a necessity. It's not sufficient, but it's necessary. If you don't have a growth mindset, if you're not able to have the conviction that what you're doing will allow you to succeed, but at the same time, the humility to know that what you're doing may completely fail, and that you should listen to other people and take their inputs you factor their inputs, right? Like it's a level 5 leadership, right? It's holding a paradoxical idea in your head of being both dead sure you can succeed and completely sure that you may fail. So I think the mindset is the big thing. And if you think you know all the answers, and if you think that there's only one way, and if you are not willing to find other good people to work with you, maybe you will still succeed a little bit, but you'll never achieve that incredible success, which I call transformational, right? Where you build a company or a foundation or a nonprofit, an organization, an institution, a movement, a project, something here that is way beyond you. I think being an individual contributor, and that's the key difference that I find between school and non-school, right? Life in general. In school, you study hard, you work for yourself, you can get good grades, you can still perhaps be the A student. But I think in life, you need to collaborate with other people in order to achieve that kind of success. You need to be very, very willing. It's not just IQ, it's also EQ.
Got it. Are there any myths out there like about Silicon Valley or successful people that you think could be debunked?
Oh, absolutely. The one that I hear all the time is that to be an entrepreneur, you got to be young. That's actually a falsity, complete falsity. The average entrepreneur who has been successful is usually somebody with a mortgage and kids and family. There's data on this. They're usually in their 40s. And there's examples of entrepreneurs who the first company they started was in their 50s, 60s, and 70s. In fact, we find as we talk to companies, people in all kinds of experience and age ranges, motivations, etc. The media really hooks up to the stories of the college dropout or of the young founder who changed the world. And yes, they exist. Absolutely. There's perhaps something to be said about not knowing what can hurt you. When you are young, you're willing to run against a wall because you don't know how hard the wall can hit you back. There is some element of truth to that for sure. When I was in my 20s, I didn't know what I know now. And perhaps some of my decision making was different. Now I know something's better, which may make me a little bit more cautious. It's true. But those are the exceptions. The young founders who drop out of college and build a life-changing company, they're not the rule. They just happen to get more attention. So that's the number one myth that I would like to break here. You can start a company at any point in your life. There are times in your life where perhaps it will be easier, but I think a lot of it is actually your own personal timing and perhaps even the time, and very much so the timing of the market. Like if you try to create a Google now, probably won't succeed, but a Google 1997, 25 years ago, that was the right timing for creating a company like that.
So timing is a critical piece. And it sounds like it's not just the young entrepreneurs. There's a lot of different age ranges that you see a lot of, because we're in the Valley. There's a lot of people who come here from, all over the world. Like, is it more younger entrepreneurs pitching you, older entrepreneurs, or you just see everything across
I have
the
all
board?
of the above. I have all of the above. So I focus specifically on digital health. As a fund, we really look for people who understand a problem really deeply, because they can then find other folks to partner with. I'm not expecting a PhD in computer science necessarily, somebody who has done 15 years of machine learning necessarily as the founder. Obviously, if they are, that's great. But my whole thesis is that I'm going to use Greg as an example, right? Greg is a technical person with a PhD. If I find a founder, let's say a doctor, who figured out a way to detect computer vision, to detect cancer using computer vision, which, by the way, is a real example in our portfolio, and they partner with somebody like Greg, and those two become the co-founders and take it forward. Great. The doctor understands cancer, the CTO co-founder understands the computer vision, and they bring their skill sets together, right? So I see a lot of founders like that. Overwhelmingly, our portfolio is more than one founder. Although in this one particular case, by the way, ironically enough, it was a solo founder. So we're not averse to solo founders. We are also not averse to more than two founders. We have in our portfolio companies that officially have 5 founders. So it's understanding the context. It's understanding how and why. And if there's any one thing that's perhaps a little bit more prominent in my personal investments through Tao, is that they have a deep understanding of healthcare. They may not have worked necessarily in healthcare, often they have, but they understand that how to sell, who to sell, how to build, what are the challenges, what is this whole mess of payers, providers, and pharma, and HMOs and PPOs and IPAs and TPAs and ACOs, and I can throw a whole bunch of other acronyms here. And if they make sense to you, congratulations, you are probably deep into healthcare. If they don't make sense to you and you are looking to build a company in healthcare, make sure that you understand that before you go out there. Because healthcare specifically is just about 20% of our GDP. It's a lot of money. It's very complex. There's a reason why it's 20% of our GDP. It's different than building something in pure consumer, right? Pure consumer, all of us at the end of the day are consumers. So you can perhaps build that intuition more easily. But if you're building something that's more domain focused, not just healthcare, by the way, enterprise or fintech or cybersecurity or manufacturing, anything, I think having that understanding, deep understanding, is crucial.
One of the trends that I find inspiring and fascinating is engineers such as yourself getting into healthcare and life extension. I was listening to a podcast with Brian Armstrong from Coinbase, and he personally got some wealth from his exit, and he's putting some of it into longevity. For example, I think they're called transcription factors.
Transcription factors?
Yeah, in order to sort of rejuvenate cells to sort of a younger state. What are some of the most exciting technologies you've been seeing that would be contributing towards that?
What you're talking about longevity, Greg, I think it's important not just to live longer, but to live longer with quality. Sign me up. I would love to live hopefully 100 years, but maybe longer. Who knows if I take care of myself. But I would rather live with good health rather than poor health. And actually, that's one of the bigger challenges we have in the US. We are right now the danger of having the first generation that will live perhaps with poorer health than their parents. It's controversial to make this statement. So I'm not making necessarily that statement with conviction. We have a risk of that. And I worry about that. In terms of the technologies out there, there's a lot of research going on. There's a lot of biotech companies getting created. You can talk about transcription factors, and there's telomeres, if you're familiar with them. There's lots of research around this and lots of controversy also around it. That's not the areas I necessarily invest in because I'm not at the moment focused on biotech. I would love to do more. We have done a handful of biotech investments. We are one step before that, which is how to help you manage your life better. Digital health companies. And I'll give you a few examples here. One of our companies called Renee.com. They just launched officially, and they're helping you as an elderly person take better care of yourself. Medication compliance, appointment reminders, you name it. Like there's so much complexity here everywhere, but especially here in the US on how healthcare should be done. It's overwhelming. If you're an elderly, you may not have the energies or the knowledge, and your caretakers also may be in a worse place even to help you. So they've created a Siri for healthcare, personal intelligence that will you guide all the different things you need to do. We have another company called GetHank.com. The company's name officially is Hank. They're focused on 55 plus. How do you make them more active? How do you help them have community and connect? And I think all three of us here can relate that one of the bigger challenges of aging is not just actually your physical health, but it's actually having a community and a purpose. More and more connected and also more and more disconnected in the world, right? So Hank is trying to solve that problem, which ties in very well with, honestly, with longevity. If you are an engaged person with yourself and with your community and with your health, you will live longer. The company that I co-founded, Health IQ, we had a fundamental premise. People who are knowledgeable and committed, it's a very cliche perhaps, but people who are knowledgeable and committed about their healthcare end up actually having better health. It's not an accident. There is a genetic component here, absolutely. Our belief, and my personal belief, is that 80% of health is within your direct agency, within your direct control. 20% is not. You cannot control for accidents. You can not control fully for genetics. I believe that it is possible for you, despite challenges, to a certain measure, is still live healthy. In our portfolio, we also have companies that focus on other aspects around health that do affect your longevity. And the biggest technology innovation that I see, Greg, is that there's an embrace now of cutting edge technologies in healthcare to a degree that wasn't there before. There's always been innovation in healthcare, always. I mean, come on, we're talking about lasers for surgery and robots to help you. Like there's always been innovation. That's actually another myth that I see, that healthcare is a little bit fossilized. That's not true. What healthcare is it has a very high bar for accepting innovation because they're dealing with human life. What I'm noticing now is that they're much more open to digital innovation, a culture within medicine about embracing it. There is better regulation around it. If you look at CMS, if you look at the FDA, they've actually become better and better about saying, look, if you have something that is a software, it shouldn't be at the same framework of regulatory framework that a pacemaker has, right? Like that is a mentality shift that has happened, especially in the last 10 years. It's good news for all of us. There's more data, there's more computational power. You can make sense of signals from noise now that you couldn't do before. Like we have all perhaps read things in the media, right? Like this algorithm or that algorithm can now diagnose this and that as well as a doctor. And now there's some caveats to this. We're not replacing the doctors, we're augmenting their skills. We're nowhere close to replacing doctors, by the way. But there's going to be a shift of doctors perhaps being able to do, and I'm using doctors as a proxy for healthcare workers, right? There's a whole set of folks involved in healthcare, but that they'll be able to do things that only humans can do really well, and the machines can do a lot more grunt work. And I'll finish with one example here, a story perhaps, since we've been talking so much about the past. About 200 years ago, there was an innovation that a lot of folks resisted, and it allowed people to quantify what was happening inside somebody's body. And there were folks at that point in time that said, no, I don't need to. I just need to be able to touch the patient and figure it out. And there were others that said, no, this is great. It's a great tool that will allow us to understand things that we don't even understand right now. That particular innovation we call today the thermometer. And there was a debate at the time about thermometers. The difference between thermometers and AI is thermometer was a unidimensional measure. AI is a multidimensional, multifactorial, billion times more powerful. I have very strong conviction that it will allow us to do healthcare more equitably, better, and if we guide it in the right way, and that's the challenge for us, if we guide it in the right way, it can make our society much better.
So I guess since we're coming to the end of the podcast, Can you give us a sense of what your life would look like 20 years from now? Or do you have any like specific goals for yourself now that, we've been talking about the past a lot? Like, what would you say, where do you envision yourself 20 years from now?
I'm glad you asked that question rather than where do I see the world in 20 years, because I've learned that people are, myself included, terrible at predicting 10, 20 years out. We think that change, we're perhaps underestimate what happens in the long term. And I'm including 10, 20 years as long term. And we overestimate what happens in the short term. We think that change happens quickly. It doesn't actually most of the time, but over a long term, it happens consistently. So I'm glad you asked the question about me personally. Me personally, I committed here to Tao for life. I want to continue growing this fund. I want 20 years from now for us to be known as one of the best funds in the world. We want to be an early stage fund. I want to grow our size, but I don't want to grow it too much because we want to continue doing early stage rather than be necessarily multi-stage. At least that's how both my partner and I think right now. And I believe we will stay committed to that. So realistically, be able to eventually lead seed Series A's and Series B's. And what the right number is for that 20 years from now, I don't know. But if you gave me the number today, I'm at 85. I would like to inch up more from there, and still keeping in mind that driving a 10x on a number like 400 million is way easier than 4 billion. So I'm looking at more the first number rather than the second number, and build a culture around it. Find good people, bring them along into the fund, grow people, give back to our entrepreneurs and pay it forward, because will come back to me. One of the things I'm proudest of is people that I've backed in the past. Many of them are invested in me now. And I look at every conversation I have as a relationship. It's not a transaction. So what I would like to be in 20 years is that I've built an even stronger community around me, that Tao has been more successful, that I'm healthy, that people around me are healthy. And the number one worry that I have, honestly, for the world is climate change, that we have been able to not solve it. I don't think we'll be able to solve it perhaps in 20 years, but perhaps we've been able to control it. We have been able to manage it. I'm personally very committed to doing things in the right way. So solar panels and electric cars and plug-ins and saving water. And I'm not perfect. There's things that I could do more perhaps, but I'm trying as best as I can. And I hope that in 20 years, there's even more of that. And last thing I would mention is we didn't talk at all about my nonprofits, but I co-founded and crowdfunded and built a hospital in rural India. It is now essentially sustainable. I would love for that on how we did it to get franchised. I would love for other people to see what we did and do it themselves. And it doesn't need to be a hospital, but find a problem you really care about, any one problem you really care about, and solve it. 1,000 of us do it. There's 1,000 less problems in the world.
Nice. One last question for me, and I don't know if Greg has others, but if you could pass anything, if you couldn't pass money on to your kids, what principles would you pass on to them? What would those be?
Well, the same ones that have been passed to me in some ways, with perhaps less mistakes that I've done. I mean, I will continue doing mistakes and I'll continue growing and learning. But I think the key principles, I guess, are be always open to learning. If you make a mistake, it's not the end of the day, usually, but don't make that mistake again, make a different one, and not be afraid of doing things just because you think you might fail, right? It's mindset once again. And it's the same mindset that I think we should apply for our lives, for our businesses, for our relationships, whether it is with our significant others, whether it's with our society overall. And this conversation is a good reminder for myself. I'm guilty as much as anybody else of sometimes forgetting these things. So it's a good reminder for myself.
I just want to say thank you for being here with us and for your friendship, Amit. And I look forward to being there 20 years from now in good health with you.
Amen. Amen. Doing cool things, extending the boundaries here of what we can do.
Well, I think that's a wrap. Nice. Thank you so much, Amit.